Welcome to this APC mock interview, where today we'll look at some questions on the anticipated hot topics for 2025. This will include coverage on key updates including the RICS Harris debate, focusing on the impact of artificial intelligence on the profession, the RICS 2025 business plan, the impact of UK and US election results on the industry, and much more. During the interview, we're going to look at each question in depth and explain some of the answers you can give, and I really hope this helps improve your understanding of the anticipated hot topics for 2025. The first area we'll take a look at is the impact of artificial intelligence on the industry, and a question we may receive on this area is, can you please explain your understanding of the RICS Harris debate? And to address this, candidates can advise that the Harris debate is organised annually by the RICS and provides a platform to address ethical concerns in the field of surveying and valuation. The debate honours Jonathan Harris, a former RICS president known for his contributions to professional development and education. A follow-on question we may receive is, can you explain what was discussed during the Harris debate in 2024? And to address this, candidates can advise that the debate focused on the theme of ethics in the age of artificial intelligence and its impact on valuation practices. The debate explored the ethical implications of incorporating artificial intelligence into valuation and surveying as AI becomes more integrated in these fields. Another question we may receive on this area is, can you please explain your view on the use of AI for the purposes of property valuation? And to address this will be largely dependent on the candidate's own views. However, a particular viewpoint may be that artificial intelligence does have the potential to offer greater accuracy and efficiency when carrying out a valuation. AI algorithms are able to evaluate other comparable properties and pinpoint an estimated valuation, and applications currently exist that take into account factors such as satellite imagery, crime rates, market trends, and regional economic factors. However, current drawbacks of AI are that site-specific abnormals such as property condition and special values cannot always be considered. There is also a susceptibility to a reliance on bad data, which can reduce the accuracy of the AI-generated inputs. AI can offer advantages with providing access to a wide array of data and greater efficiencies when used as a data collection and processing tool. However, in its current stage of development and into the future, it may always be critical to have significant input from a human appraiser standpoint in order to undergo rigorous checks and due diligence. A follow-on question we may receive on this area is, can you please explain the ethical concerns regarding the adoption of AI for the purposes of valuation? And to address this, candidates may advise that it's important to consider that AI algorithms do rely heavily on data, and if this data is inaccurate, incomplete, or intentionally weighted following biased data input, then this can dramatically skew results in the favour or to the detriment of the parties involved. There are also great issues around transparency of the data input and analysis, with operators of AI not always fully cognizant of how results have been generated. In order for a valuation to be compliant with RICS valuation standards, transparency of how the value has been determined is key. And there is a perception that AI models are often regarded as closed boxes, where even creators can't fully explain how decisions have been made. Therefore, to run a valuation with sole AI input is not currently compliant with current regulations and industry standards. Look, if you're finding this video useful so far and you're serious about passing your APC, we put together a question and answers revision guidebook, and this will save countless hours compiling revision notes and contains over 1,000 questions and answers based on real-life APC interviews. It also contains example submission documents and explained step-by-step how to complete the APC. Along with the step-by-step guide, there is also a free APC diary template, along with revision mind maps on the RICS hot topics to support your revision. The study guide has helped around 90% of my colleagues pass their APC first time, and I really hope you find this a useful resource when preparing for your APC. Grab it now using the link in the description below. We'll now take a look at some questions regarding the economic factors that can have an impact on the construction and property industries. The first question we'll take a look at on this area is, what impact will the UK Labour government's election have on the property and construction industries? And to address this, candidates may advise, regarding house building targets, the Labour government has pledged to build 1.5 million homes over the next parliamentary term, and they have reinstated mandatory housing targets and updating the National Planning Policy Framework in order to achieve this. There has also been a promise of significant investment within infrastructure projects, with significant funding planned for public infrastructure, including transportation networks, renewable energy projects and urban development. This will create opportunities for large-scale construction projects and is likely to drive economic growth and job creation. There is also a huge focus on sustainability, with the Labour government committing to embedding green practices across the industry, with policies focusing on eco-friendly materials, retrofitting of existing buildings for energy efficiency, and integrating biodiversity within urban planning. This could lead to a significant increase in demand for sustainable construction practices through regulations such as the Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards. Labour also plans to address the current construction sector skills shortage through youth training initiatives and improve working conditions, such as banning 0 hours contracts, and this could in turn create a more skilled and stable workforce, but will require significant investment in order to meet labour demands. And the next question we'll take a look at is, what impact will the 2024 US election results have on the property and construction industries? And to address this, candidates can advise that there is likely to be impacts regarding currency fluctuations, as the value of the US dollar often fluctuates sharply during and after an election, and these shifts directly affect the exchange rate between the dollar and pound, which in turn impacts the attractiveness of UK property to overseas investors. A weaker pound against the dollar could mean heightened interest from the US and other international buyers, particularly in prime markets like London, driving higher property prices. There is also likely to be a large impact on interest rates, as the US election influences the Federal Reserve's economic policies, which in turn affects global financial markets, and changes in US monetary policy could lead to adjustments by the Bank of England, and for UK property, interest rates are crucial, as a rise in interest rates could dampen demand, making mortgages more expensive. However, conversely, if rates stay relatively low, the market could remain buoyant, with borrowing costs staying affordable for longer. The US election is also likely to have an impact on supply chain and construction, as changes in US trade policy or tariffs could have a ripple effect through the global economy, affecting the cost of materials such as steel and timber, which could in turn result in higher costs for builders and slow down the pace of new developments or push up prices in the UK marketplace. With the US having a world-leading tech sector, the election results could also encourage further growth in the sector, which could increase the demand for technology and remote working, and this in turn could bolster demand for homes in England's regional cities, which have become increasingly popular with remote workers seeking affordability and a better work-life balance. The next question we'll take a look at is, what is your economic outlook for the 2025 UK construction sector? And to address this, candidates can advise that the UK construction industry has experienced a slowdown across 2024 due to rising material and labour costs, with high inflation and interest rates keeping prices high. Due to falling inflation and small interest rate cuts towards the back end of 2024, material prices such as steel, chipboard and plastic piping are now starting to soften, and these market shifts should result in material price reductions entering into 2025 and create increased affordability for developments that may have been postponed due to them being previously unviable. A further key challenge remains in that there is a persistent skills shortage ongoing, which has been exacerbated by Brexit's impact on labour supply. This shortage is pushing up costs, making it vital for the industry to invest in apprenticeships and training programmes. Environmental sustainability also remains a key priority for the Labour government, which should support a continued shift and preference for sustainable building methods and products. These are typically more expensive, which will see a trade-off between affordability and sustainability for larger scale developers. We'll now take a look at some questions regarding sustainability, which remains a key area of focus for the RICS going into 2025. And the next question we'll take a look at is, can you please explain your understanding of what happened at Conference of the Parties 29? And to address this, candidates can advise that COP29 was held in Baku, Azerbaijan, in November 2024, and this focused on addressing the climate change finance gap through the Loss and Damage Fund designed to support vulnerable nations. Some progress was made on working towards a global carbon market, where the buying and selling of carbon emissions is facilitated to help reduce global emissions, and this market would incentivise global emissions for companies, countries and other entities. By putting a price on carbon, it incentivises industries to innovate and invest in cleaner technologies and help to reduce the global carbon footprint. Progress was also made on the NCQG, or New Climate Financial Goal, and this was to replace the previous $100 billion goal, and this intended to ensure that sufficient financial resources are mobilised in order to support developing countries to address the impacts of loss and damage from climate-related disasters. A consensus on the amount and scope of funds required was discussed during COP29. A follow-on question we may receive on this area: can you please explain your understanding of the term global carbon market? And to address this, candidates can advise that this refers to an international system that allows for the buying and selling of carbon emissions, allowances or credits. It is designed to help reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by putting a price on carbon to incentivise countries, companies and other entities in order to innovate and invest in cleaner technologies and help to reduce the global carbon footprint. Another question we may receive is: can you please provide a high-level overview of the RICS Sustainability Report for 2024? And to address this, candidates can advise that the RICS Sustainability Report provided a detailed analysis of the current state of sustainability within the built environment sector. The key findings included, first of all, the identification of an increased market demand for green buildings. However, the adoption of sustainable practices remains limited. High upfront costs and insufficient government incentives form significant barriers to widespread implementation of greener building methods. The report also highlighted a need for consistent sustainability measurement across projects, and tools like the RICS Whole Life Carbon Assessment does aim to address this issue by providing a unified framework for assessing and reducing carbon emissions throughout a building's life cycle. The RICS emphasises that the level of commitment and action needs to increase substantially in order to achieve 2050 net zero targets, and the RICS continues to play a pivotal role in shaping sustainability policies and standards globally. Its involvement in initiatives like the UN's Buildings Breakthrough highlights the importance of harmonising sustainability standards worldwide. The next question we'll take a look at is: can you please explain your understanding of the minimum energy efficiency standards? And to address this, we can advise that the minimum energy efficiency standards are regulations in the UK that set out the minimum energy performance requirements for buildings, specifically for private rented properties. Under the regulations, properties in the private rented sector must meet at least an E rating on their energy performance certificate in order to be legally rented out. And if a building is rated lower than an E, landlords are required to improve the energy efficiency of the property unless specific exemptions apply. The regulations are part of the UK government's broader environmental and sustainability agenda, and they aim to ensure that properties are energy efficient and more environmentally friendly. The next question we'll take a look at is: can you please explain your understanding of the RICS policies on diversity, equity and inclusion? And to address this, candidates can advise that diversity, equity and inclusion remains a huge priority of the RICS. This is because surveying and construction are typically industries that have lagged behind others when attracting and retaining talent from different backgrounds, with the industry remaining a white male-dominated profession. Within the RICS policy document, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, the RICS sets out action plans for firms in order to support with attracting and retaining talent, regardless of their gender, socio-economic, disability, race, age or religious backgrounds. This includes actions such as making offices accessible for all visiting personnel, ensuring speaking panels at events are diverse, consideration of where and how jobs are advertised, removing bias from the recruitment process, providing training for staff on policies and inclusive practices. The RICS rules of conduct also require RICS regulated firms and members to encourage diversity and inclusion, and there is also the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark, which is promoted by the RICS. The next question we'll take a look at is: can you please explain your understanding of the terms diversity, equity and inclusion, and explain why these are so important? To address this, candidates can advise that diversity refers to the makeup of who we are as humans and what makes us different. This can be in relation to our skin colour, socio-economic background, disabilities, education or religious beliefs. Organisations with a diverse workforce are proven to be more effective and are better placed to serve their communities, as they are more likely to understand the issues facing those communities. Equity is a recognition that all employees may not have been afforded the same opportunities, and looks to address any imbalances within a workforce by looking to provide equal opportunities for all. This can be done by ensuring each person has the right tools and support to fulfill their potential, regardless of their career starting point. And ensuring equity within the workforce is critical to attracting, retaining, and developing talent within an organisation. And inclusion is a key part of an organisation's culture and aims to improve inclusivity of all personnel, regardless of their background. This can be crucial in allowing a workforce to feel supported, included, and comfortable in order to be their true selves and perform at their best during the workplace. Are you aware of any guidance that applies to RICS members when using social media? To address this, candidates can firstly reference their knowledge of the RICS Guidance Note, Use of Social Media Guidance for Members version 1, and this guidance note first took effect from the 30th of June 2021. With the use of social media sometimes being complex and sensitive, candidates will be expected to have a knowledge of this guidance note, as this sets out the same standards as stipulated in the RICS Rules of Conduct and reminds members that these do not change whether communicating via social media, face-to-face or traditional forms of media. So it's definitely worth reading through a copy of the guidance note and familiarising yourself with its contents. A follow-on question we may receive is, how do you ensure you operate in line with the RICS guidance on the use of social media? And to address this, firstly, candidates could advise they are always sure to use social media in a responsible and professional manner, in the same way that they communicate via face-to-face or other written forms of communication. They can also advise that they are sure to use professional and respectful language when communicating and understand their responsibility in representing the RICS. Candidates and members of the RICS should never make a post on social media that is dishonest or would cause offence in any way, and members should realise that this could potentially undermine public confidence and trust in the profession. And staying with this subject, another question we may expect on this area would be, when would the RICS investigate a social media post made by one of its members? And to address this, candidates could advise that an investigation may take place if a social media post is discriminatory, dishonest, abusive or threatening, likely to cause significant harm, distress or offence to a person, shows a pattern of frequent or large number of concerning communications, and ignores previous advice or warnings about concerns. And with the recent introduction of the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark, this is another area that may be a hot topic for candidates sitting their final assessment in 2024. A question we may anticipate on this area is, could you please explain your understanding of the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark? And to address this, candidates can advise that the RICS is launching a scheme known as the Inclusive Employee Quality Mark. This is designed to improve diversity and inclusion within the property and construction sector, which is always typically lags behind other industries. The scheme requires employers to pledge their commitment to adopting and continually improving against the following 6 principles. These are leadership and vision, recruitment, staff development, staff retention, staff engagement, and continuous improvement. Participating firms will be required to assess their performance against these criteria on a biannual basis. The RICS will use the assessment information to document the outcomes and trends for the profession as a whole. And participating firms are able to use the branding signatory to the RICS Inclusive Employee Quality Mark. A follow-on question we may receive in this area is, what are the main benefits of diversity and inclusion? Candidates can advise that diverse inclusive environments help to attract skilled professionals from diverse backgrounds. They establish a sense of belonging among employees. It encourages employees to feel more connected, increases productivity, reduces staff turnover, and allows employees to feel valued and accepted. With there being a big push by the RICS to improve diversity and inclusion, another question we may receive regarding this area is, what is the RICS doing to improve diversity and inclusion? And to address this, candidates can advise that the RICS has set up Diversity Inclusion Leadership, which is a knowledge hub allowing the RICS to share ideas on how and why diversity and inclusion is so important to the RICS. This has included initiatives including International Women's Day, celebrating the achievement of women in our profession, Pride 2022, with an equality pledge focusing on the importance of the LGBTQ+ representation in the profession, Smith Review aiming to develop black and ethnic minority talent within the profession. Following the updated definitions of professional standards and practice information, this question again is another area that may be a hot topic for APC candidates. And that is, please explain your understanding of how the RICS define professional standards versus practice information. And to address this, candidates can advise that following the Birchard Review and its recommendations, the RICS have introduced two new definitions for professional guidance, which are now split into professional standards and practice information. These supersede the former definitions, including professional statements, guidance notes, and codes of practice. Professional standards set out requirements or expectations for RICS members and regulated firms with a focus on the baseline expectations for competence and ethical behaviour. They contain mandatory requirements that surveyors must follow where the word must is used, with best practice that surveyors should follow where the word should is used. And practice information sets out supporting guidance that advise surveyors in delivering specific services or working in specific areas of practice. The guidance is not mandatory and does not provide explicit recommendations. Therefore, practice information can refer to processes, toolkits, checklists, insights, research, and technical information or advice. Another question we may expect to see as a hot topic is, please explain your understanding of the guidelines around the use of the RICS logo. And to address this, candidates can advise that they are aware that the RICS guidelines are split into the rules of conduct for firms, use of the RICS logo and designation, and guidelines for personal use of the RICS logo. These guidelines contain detailed information regarding correct usage, which is approved by the Standards and Regulations Board. As a qualified RICS member, you have the right to use the logo for personal use, for example on business cards and personal email signatures. And there are specific rules around how the RICS master logo is presented. For example, the font and colour must not be adjusted, and there should be a minimum clearance around the logo equivalent to the size of the capital R within RICS. And here is a graphic to demonstrate the correct usage of the RICS logo. Another question we may expect to receive is, what is IPMS? And to address this, candidates can advise that IPMS stands for the International Property Measurement Standards. The IPMS is a coalition of 80 global professional organisations that was first formed in 2013 when it produced its first version of its measurement standards. There were various versions of the standards that are targeted at industry-specific sectors, such as IPMS Office, IPMS Residential, and IPMS Retail. IPMS All Buildings was introduced in January 2023 and now supersedes all previous standards. The RICS has been a pivotal member of the coalition since its inception and provides consultation and advice to its members. And given the recent updates to the IPMS, we may also expect to receive the following question, which is, please explain your understanding of the recent updates. To address this, candidates can advise that IPMS All Buildings was first introduced in January 2023 and now supersedes all previous standards and applies to all buildings irrespective of their use or sector class. Key updates to the latest standards include a shorter and more concise format has been adopted. Definitions set out within the standards were made to be deliberately unique in an attempt to prevent confusion amongst existing standards across global markets. The IPMS is organised into 4 volumes that can be utilised by different professional groups in various scenarios. This is thought to encourage the adoption of the standards on a global scale, as some markets were slow to incorporate IPMS and call for a one simplified version of the standards. What are the new RICS professional indemnity insurance requirements for 2022? To address this, we can say that the requirements for professional indemnity insurance were updated following issue of the UK Professional Indemnity Insurance Requirements version 9 with effect from the 1st of April 2022. The new requirements introduced a change to the maximum uninsured excess of professional indemnity insurance. This essentially means that for large companies with a turnover in excess of £10 million, there is no maximum limit of uninsured excess, whereas for companies with a turnover of less than £10 million, the maximum uninsured excess is the greater of £10,000 or 2.5% of the insured sum. And here we can see the new requirements in a table format. The next question we'll take a look at is, what are the general requirements regarding professional indemnity insurance set by the RICS? And to address this, we can say that the policy cover must be made on each and every claims basis. This means that each claim is considered in its own right rather than in the aggregate. The RICS sets out the minimum levels of indemnity based on the company's turnover within the preceding year. The policy must be fully retroactive. This means that no matter when the claim took place, it's the policy that's actually in place at the time is the policy that will be called upon. The RICS sets out the maximum levels of uninsured excess as previously discussed. Run-off cover must be in place, and we must say that the policy should cover past and present employees, directors and partners. And from this table we can see the minimum levels of indemnity based on company turnover. For example, for companies with a turnover of £100,000 or less, the minimum level of indemnity cover required is £250,000. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the RICS Futures Report? And to address this, we can say that in 2015, the Futures Report was launched and highlighted key trends in the industry such as urbanisation, disruption of big data and the climate crisis as all presenting key challenges to the property and construction industries. Since 2015, the RICS have analysed these trends by engaging with the profession to keep its members best informed on how to address these key issues. Resulting findings highlighted within the 2020 Futures Report include, first of all, that construction is an industry that produces large amounts of data. It's the industry that produces the most amount of data behind the financial services sector. However, it's currently estimated that 95% of the data is currently wasted. The RICS is setting up an innovation and technology hub to act as a centre of expertise on how this data can be put to good use. Another key issue highlighted was the rapid urbanisation in China, where the formation of megacities is creating key challenges. The amount of land classed as urban has doubled since the year 2000, resulting in polluted, congested and expensive areas. The RICS aims to encourage its members working in these regions to adopt a more sustainable approach to the development of these areas, and this has been done through utilisation of outer urban areas. Another key issue highlighted was the rapid increase in the use of drones within the industry. This has presented key challenges in terms of compliance issues for surveyors, taking into account current and emerging regulatory trends, national and international legislation standards. The RICS is helping its members by developing a number of online courses to support surveyors in this area to ensure that the technology is being used efficiently, safely and legally. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the RICS Levitt report? And to address this, we can say that the Levitt report was commissioned by the RICS following a Treasury Management audit in 2018. Prior to the audit, the RICS had to extend its overdraft facility by around £3 million due to inaccurate cash flow forecasting. The Treasury Management audit offered a no assurance verdict on RICS internal financial control procedures, and following this, the Levitt report was commissioned. The conclusion of the Levitt report alluded to an internal power struggle due to its two-board structure made up of a management board and executive board. Following the report, the RICS accepted each of Levitt's recommendations, including that the RICS Government Council to have more oversight over internal dealings of the RICS. The RICS Governing Council are to be briefed by the Management Board as opposed to a single CEO. The RICS Governing Council are to oversee executive management bonuses, and the report called for greater transparency as the CEO could have involved the Management Board in order to rectify the Treasury issues. No evidence of improper or illegal conduct was discovered as a result of the Levitt report. The next question we'll take a look at is what are the new rules of conduct, which we can note were updated in February 2022. And to address this, we can first of all reference rule number 1, where members and firms must be honest, act with integrity, and comply with their professional obligations, including obligations to the RICS. Rule number 2, where members and firms must maintain their professional competence and ensure that services are provided by competent individuals who have the necessary expertise. Rule number 3, where members and firms must provide good quality and diligent service. Rule number 4, where members and firms must treat others with respect and encourage diversity and inclusion. And rule number 5, where members and firms must act in the public interest, take responsibility for their actions, and act to prevent harm and maintain public confidence in the profession. We may receive a follow-on question on this area due to the rules of conduct having recently changed, and to address this we can say that the previous rules have been in place since 2007. Following research and consultation with RICS members, firms and members of the public, the majority voted in favour of replacing the existing rules of conduct and separate global professional and ethical standards. This was to provide a single document to enable greater clarity for RICS members and firms, and there is now a greater focus on clearer example behaviours, understanding evolving technology, and tackling climate change. We may receive a follow-on question asking us to talk through our understanding of the changes to the rules of conduct. And to address this, we can say that the Rules of Conduct October 2021 Global Practice Statement overhauled the previous separate documents, which were the Rules of Conduct for Members, Rules of Conduct for Firms, and the Global Professional and Ethical Standards. Appendix A of the Rules of Conduct now contains the professional obligations of members and firms. We may receive a follow-on question to this asking us to talk us through our understanding of the changes, and we can say that following the issue of the Rules of Conduct October 2021 Global Practice Statement, this document now overhauls the previous separate documentation, which were the Rules of Conduct for Members, the Rules of Conduct for Firms, and the Global Professional and Ethical Standards. So these three separate documents have now been overhauled in the 2021 Global Practice Statement, and Appendix A of this document now contains the professional obligations of members and firms. Candidates may also receive follow-on questions asking to explain an in-depth understanding of each of the rules of conduct. So the first question we'll take a look at on this area is please explain your understanding of rule number 1. And to address this, candidates could say that having reviewed the example behaviours, in adhering to rule number 1, members and firms should not allow themselves to be influenced improperly through the acceptance of work referrals, gifts or hospitality. Members and firms must also be sure to identify conflicts of interest and not provide services or advice where these conflicts of interest occur. This could be a scenario, for example, where you have reduced impartiality due to an existing relationship, for example being friends with a main contractor who has subsequently been selected to submit a tender would form a conflict of interest that would need to be reported. If asked to explain your understanding of rule number 2, candidates could reference that ensuring compliance with rule number 2, members and firms must only act for clients where they have the necessary knowledge, skills and resources to carry out the work competently. Firms must supervise any employees or subcontractors undertaking work on their behalf. For example, requesting that a junior surveyor undertakes a complex valuation due to resourcing issues would create problems in achieving compliance with this rule. Instead, an experienced and suitably qualified surveyor should be asked to undertake the valuation. In explaining our in-depth understanding of rule number 3, candidates could reference that as an RICS member or regulated firm, we must be sure to understand a client's project-specific requirements before acting on their behalf. The client's scope of services should be agreed, along with any exclusions and timescales for achieving each of the deliverables before signing up to formal terms of engagement. In explaining our understanding of rule number 4, candidates can advise that the RICS expects its members to respect the rights of others and treat others with courtesy. We need to ensure that everyone is treated fairly and look to eliminate any instances of discrimination on the basis of disability, gender, pregnancy, race, religion, or sexual orientation. RICS members and firms also need to adopt a no-tolerance policy to bullying or harassment. In explaining our understanding of rule number 5, candidates can advise that members and firms are required to question practices and decisions that they suspect are not right and raise concerns with colleagues, senior management, clients or the RICS. When making public statements, we need to ensure that these do not undermine public confidence in the profession. When receiving and processing complaints, we need to ensure that these are dealt with promptly, openly and professionally. In complying with rule number 5, a useful sense check to ensure compliance is to ask ourselves if we would be comfortable in standing behind our actions if these were brought into the media or a public forum. We may also receive a question checking our understanding of the professional obligations of members. And to address this, firstly we need to reference that members must comply with the CPD requirements set by the RICS, which requires 20 hours of CPD for each calendar year, 10 hours of which must be formal CPD. Secondly, that members must cooperate with the RICS, and thirdly, that members must promptly provide all information reasonably requested by the Standards and Regulation Board or those exercising delegated authority on its behalf. Candidates may also receive a question checking their understanding of the professional obligations of firms, and to address this, first of all, they must reference that firms must publish a complaints handling procedure, which includes an alternative dispute resolution provider approved by the RICS, and they must also maintain a complaints log. Number 2, that firms must ensure that all previous and current professional work is covered by adequate and appropriate professional indemnity cover. Number 3, that firms with a sole principal must make appropriate arrangements for their professional work to continue in the event of their incapacity, death or absence or inability to work. Obligation number 4 is that firms must cooperate with the RICS. Obligation number 5, where firms must promptly provide all information reasonably requested by the Standards and Regulation Board. Rule number 6, that firms must display on their business literature, in accordance with RICS public policy on designations, and a designation to denote that they are regulated by the RICS. And finally, obligation number 7, where firms must report to the RICS any matter that they are required to report under the rules for the registration of firms. What is COP? And to address this, we can say that COP stands for Conference of the Parties. The summit was attended by the countries that signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and this was a treaty that came into force in 1994. The conference takes place every year where member countries come together to discuss progress on previous agreements and put in place future initiatives to tackle climate change. The next question we'll take a look at is how does this relate to the Paris Agreement? And to address this, we can say that at the COP21 meeting in Paris in 2015, the Paris Agreement was formed. During the COP meeting, the parties agreed to pursue efforts to prevent temperature rises to more than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels in order to avoid the most dangerous impacts of global warming. The following conference of the parties' meetings discuss how each nation is progressing against the original Paris Agreement. The next question we'll take a look at is following the Grenfell disaster, are you aware of any guidance that RICS has published to support fire safety? And to address this, we can say that we are aware the RICS has published the guidance note Cladding for Surveyors, first edition, March 2021, and this supports surveyors working on multi-storey and multi-occupancy residential buildings. The document aims to improve surveyors' knowledge of external wall cladding systems that may be considered within the external wall fire review. Whilst the document is useful and provides illustrated examples of cladding systems, we must say that we appreciate that fire safety is of great importance and ultimately falls outside our area of expertise. If my client asks for advice on fire safety, I would always recommend that they seek advice via a professional fire risk assessment. A following question we may receive on this area is what is ACM cladding? And to address this, we can say that ACM stands for Aluminium Composite Material. It consists of two skins of aluminium bonded either side of a lightweight core of materials such as polyethylene or a mineral core aimed to provide insulating properties. A following question we may receive is what is the significance of ACM in relation to Grenfell? To address this, we can say that ACM cladding in use was thought to contain combustible materials that contributed towards the spread of fire across the external elevation. As a result, the UK government has now banned the use of combustible materials on high-rise homes from the 29th of November 2018. The ban means that combustible materials are not permitted on external walls of new buildings above 18 metres. Local authorities also need to undertake remediation works to replace dangerous ACM cladding on existing buildings. Another question we may receive on this area is what is an EWS1? And to address this, we can say that this is an external wall system fire review certificate. We can add that they are applicable when a multi-storey residential property is either being bought, sold or remortgaged. It is not a building safety certificate, but more a remortgaging valuation tool. The RICS and mortgage lenders jointly formed the EWS1 as a way of mortgage lenders assessing the external wall safety of buildings over 18 metres in height. Another question we may receive on this area is what is the new Fire Safety Act 2021? And to address this, we can say that the Fire Safety Act was introduced in March 2020 and holds significant legal obligations of organisations deemed to be responsible persons. It is introduced as an update to the Fire Safety Order 2005. The main focus of the Act is the amendment of the Fire Safety Order to clarify that it will apply to the structure and external walls, as well as anything attached to external walls, such as doors, windows and cladding. Under the previous regime, it was unclear who was responsible for fire safety compliance of these elements of the building. This will force owners, landlords and managing agents of multi-occupied residential buildings to take precautions to identify any dangerous cladding on those buildings and remediate any dangerous materials, whilst introducing interim measures to ensure that the building can be occupied safely. Another question we may receive is what is meant by the term inclusive design? And to address this, we can advise that inclusive design aims to ensure that the differences in the way that people use the built and natural environment can be accommodated through dignified, equal and intuitive use by everybody. Inclusive design is the responsibility of everyone who works in the built environment, including planners, those who commission new buildings, access consultants, designers, architects, engineers, surveyors, property owners and facilities managers. The next question we'll take a look at is what is meant by the term lifetime homes. And to address this, we can say that the Lifetime Homes Standard was introduced by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation Lifetime Homes Group in 1991. The standard aims to provide adaptable homes that cater for the needs of everyone, from young families to older people with temporary or permanent mobility issues. The principal aim is to allow people to remain in their homes for longer and reduce the demand on the care sector. The concept is based on 5 key principles, including inclusivity, accessibility, adaptability, sustainability, and good value. A number of local planning authorities now require that the Lifeline Home Standard is adopted in new build developments. For example, in Wales and Northern Ireland, new publicly funded homes are required to comply with this standard. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the Fitness for Human Habitation Act? And to address this, we can say that this is a new law introduced in March 2019 to ensure that rented houses and flats are fit for human habitation. The Fitness for Human Habitation Act aims to help tenants currently living in properties that could cause them harm and to ensure that irresponsible landlords improve their properties. If rented houses and flats are not fit for human habitation, tenants can take their landlords to court. The court can make the landlord carry out repairs or put right health and safety problems, and the court can also make the landlord pay compensation to the tenant. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the latest edition of the RICS Red Book? And to address this, we can say that the latest edition of the Red Book is the RICS Valuation Global Standards, effective from 31st of January 2022. This date is to coincide with the same date the latest edition of the International Valuation Standards, and a follow-up question we may receive is why was the Red Book updated? The main reasons for updating the Red Book is to take into account of the changes to the International Valuation Standards. Note that the Red Book Global Standards adopts and applies the standards of the IVS. Key changes include emphasising the need to agree clear, unambiguous terms of engagement. The terms quasi, partial or non-Red Book should not be used in terms of engagement or reporting. Instead, the exceptions should be specifically stated and explained in the terms of engagement and valuation report. The next question we'll take a look at is what are the International Finance Reporting Standards? To address this, we can advise that the standards were created to bring consistency and integrity to accounting standards and practices, regardless of the company or country. They were issued by the London-based Accounting Standards Board and address record keeping, account reporting, and other aspects of financial reporting. The standards specify in detail how companies must maintain their records and report their expenses and income. They were established to create a common accounting language that could be understood globally by investors, auditors, government regulators, and other interested parties. We should note that the standards are not used by all countries. For example, in the US, they use the generally accepted accounting principles.
So we'll now take a look at some questions that are focused on the valuation competency. The first question that we'll take a look at is what is the residual valuation method and how is this applied? And to address this, we can say that the main aim of the residual valuation method is to establish how much a purchaser should pay for a development site. The gross development value is established first of all, and thereafter all the costs associated with undertaking the development are then deducted. This leaves a surplus amount remaining, which is also known as the residual value. This represents how much the developer can afford to pay for the development site or property. The GDV or gross development value forms a key part of the calculation, and this is the aggregate market value of the development based on the special assumption that the development is complete at the date of valuation. The costs considered and deducted from the GDV will include site preparation, construction, sales and marketing, contingency, financing, and finally the developer's profit. In this worked example, here we can identify the key steps of the residual valuation method. In this case, the property forms a plot of land with planning permission for a detached house. The valuer will assess the value of the completed development, which is also known as a gross development value, which in this case is shown as £765,000. The valuer will then deduct the associated costs of the development in order to calculate what the purchaser can pay for the site. From the GDV, the valuer has deducted the costs of construction along with the development contingency and professional fees. The valuer will also need to account for the costs of estate agent fees, solicitors' fees for handling the sale of the completed development. From taking these costs away from the GDV, the valuer has calculated what the developer can afford to pay at the end of the development, and the valuer has assumed that the purchaser would bid £250,000 to avoid the higher stamp duty rate. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the profits method and how is this undertaken? The profits method is derived from trade-related properties where the value is derived from the business and its trading potential. This trading potential is a profit that a reasonably efficient operator would expect to realise from occupying the property. Examples of when the profits method would be used would include for hotels, schools, cinemas and theatres. and the common characteristic of these properties is where the property has been designed for a specific use and the value is intrinsically linked to what the owner can generate from the property. The value therefore reflects the trading potential of the property, and it includes the property interest, business and locational goodwill, fixtures and fittings, all reflected as a single figure. Valuers of trade-related properties usually specialise in this particular field, as a knowledge of the operational aspect of the property and of the industry is fundamental to being able to value the property accurately. In this worked example of the profits method, the property under consideration is an established 50-bedroom hotel within a provincial city. To carry out the profits method, the valuer will carry out an analysis of the accounts of the hotel in order to assess the sustainable earnings that the hotel will generate. The valuer could use the actual earnings from the previous year or the average of the last 3 years. In the example, the valuer has assumed that the 50 beds will let at an average room rate of £55 per night and that the hotel will be 70% occupied throughout the year on average, giving a total income of just over £700,000 per annum. For example, the hotel does not have other sources of income such as from a restaurant or bar or other services. The valuer has then deducted the key costs that the owner will incur, which are typically staff, business rates, repairs, laundry and promotion. It appears that the hotel will generate a cash surplus of around £350,000 per annum. The valuer has then adopted a simple multiplier on earnings, which should be based on evidence of transactions. In this example, the valuer has adopted a multiplier of 8. Note that the valuer has carried out a simple analysis by dividing the total value into the number of rooms. The valuation in this example therefore equals £56,000 per room. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the depreciated replacement cost method of valuation and how does this work? And to address this, we can say that the depreciated replacement cost method provides an indication of value based on the buyer paying no more or no less than the cost to obtain the asset based on the current equivalent. This involves calculating the replacement cost of the asset with its modern equivalent, including deductions for physical deterioration and all other relevant forms of obsolescence. This method is known as the method of last resort and is used when it is impractical to use all other valuation methods. The cost approach is used to value unusual properties where there is no active market, such as for mosques, wharfs or refineries. Under the cost approach, the capital value is determined by calculating the cost of building the equivalent asset and the purchase land value. The replacement build cost should be calculated using new and cost-effective building materials and techniques. And the total value of the new property is then adjusted for deterioration using evidential information and recent transaction values to calculate the land purchase cost. The total value of the new property is then adjusted for deterioration using evidential information and recent transaction values to calculate the land purchase cost. In this worked example of the DCR method, the property under consideration is a new build primary school. The property is a 25,000 square foot primary school which opened 5 years ago. With schools often classed as specialised assets, they can be valued on a depreciated replacement cost basis. The concept of DCR is to consider the value based on what it would cost to replace the asset. A DCR requires the valuer to assess what a modern equivalent would cost to build, including the acquisition of a new site. These costs should include the cost of finance over the build period and professional fees. The building element is then depreciated to reflect the differences between the existing school and the hypothetical modern equivalent replacement. The cost of modern equivalent is depreciated under 3 main headings, and these are physical depreciation, functional depreciation, and external depreciation. In this example, the valuer has assumed that the modern equivalent asset would be the same size as the actual school. The total cost of the modern equivalent has then been reduced by 15% to reflect the differences between the actual school compared to a brand new modern equivalent. The land value is based on what a prudent purchaser would pay for a replacement site, and we can see that this results in an overall replacement cost of circa £5.2 million. The next question we'll take a look at is what is the comparable method of valuation and how does this work? To address this question, we can say that the comparable method primarily uses sales data of properties that have been recently sold, focusing on assets that have a similar size, location, condition, features and specifications. The comparable method is underpinned by comparable evidence, which is identified, analysed and applied to the real estate that is to be valued, and is therefore fundamental to producing a sound valuation that can stand scrutiny from the client and from the market. The valuer will compile a schedule of evidence that will contain details about the property, such as its building age, quality, location, tenure, size, transaction price, date of sale, and price per square foot, all of which can be used for the purposes of a comparison with other similar properties. The comparables gathered should be comprehensive, and that is to say that there should be several comparables rather than these being singular. They should be recent and therefore representative of the current market conditions. In this worked example, the comparable method is used to value a single industrial unit with vacant possession. The property is a single industrial unit of 10,000 square foot, which is in good repair and was developed 10 years ago. The unit is currently vacant, and a similar size unit recently sold for £40 per square foot capital value, but it was around 15 years old. The approach here is that the valuer has a good comparable at £40 per square foot, although the property that is being valued is newer, is in a better location, and is arguably more valuable. The valuer has applied a small uplift of 5% on capital value to reflect the better location, and a further 7.5% to reflect that the building is also newer. We'll now take a look at some questions that are focused on the inspection competency. The first question we'll take a look at under the inspection competency is, what do you need to consider before going to site to carry out an inspection? And first of all, we can reference the consideration whether we are competent to undertake the inspection. We also need to ask ourselves, are we properly insured? Whether a formal agreement has been signed by the client and is in place prior to undertaking the inspection. What are the particular risks that we need to consider in regards to health and safety, working at height, any presence of asbestos, for example. We'd also need to consider what kind of survey it is that we are undertaking, and also review all relevant information that relates to the existing building information, any leases and transaction prices. And finally, which type of equipment we would need to take along in order to carry out the survey. We may also be asked a follow-up question to this, checking our approach and understanding of how we would go about undertaking an inspection of a property. And to address this, we could say that my own personal preference when undertaking inspections has been to undertake these from the top floor of the property, working my way down. In the past, I've normally walked around the building externally a couple of times, first of all to get my bearings and get an initial understanding, paying close attention to the indication of age, the form of construction, and any extensions and external defects. I then started the inspection externally by inspecting each elevation in turn, looking at the roof, elevations, windows, doors, drainage, and any rainwater goods. I would then typically move inside and again start from the roof space and move down through the various floors of the property. We may also receive a question from the assessors asking what kind of risks we would need to consider, and to address this we could first of all reference the risk of lone working, the presence of any asbestos, our ability to access roof spaces at height, our ability to access roofs and roof spaces, and in particular the risks associated with working at height. We'd also need to consider any hazards associated with the derelict nature of the property or the empty property, and also any risks associated with working within confined spaces. We may also get a question from the assessors checking our understanding of the equipment associated with undertaking property inspections. And in this example, we may get asked a question on our understanding of how a disto laser measure works and how we would go about checking whether this is accurate. And to address this, we could first of all say that the disto sends out a laser beam and measures the time taken for it to reflect, which then generates a distance. We could check this by first of all using a known measured distance within the office prior to undertaking the inspection. And we'd also need to say that it would become less accurate the longer the distance, and also reference that it's particularly difficult to use this piece of equipment outside over long distances because it is difficult to aim and see the laser. The next question we'll take a look at is, have you heard of a theodolite and how does this work? And to address this, we could say that the theodolite is an optical instrument consisting of a small mounted telescope which is rotatable in both horizontal and vertical planes, and this is used to measure angles in both horizontal and vertical instances. The telescope is mounted on a tripod with adjustable legs, and the theodolite is then used in the field to obtain precise angular measurements for triangulation, and levelling can also be accomplished with the aid of a spirit level using crosshairs in the telescope, and this would permit accurate alignment with the objective being sighted. We may also get a question on our understanding of a hygrometer, and to address this we could say that a hygrometer is used to measure the amount of humidity in the air and to diagnose condensation. An electrical resistance meter provides the temperature and relative humidity. Older equipment also includes the whirling hygrometer. The next competency we'll take a look at is building pathology. And the first question we'll take a look at under this competency is, what are the typical defects of a flat roof and what are the remedies? And to address this question, first of all we can mention a typical defect with a flat roof is crazing. And surface crazing is caused where there is a lack of adequate protection from the harmful effects. And surface crazing is caused where there is a lack of adequate protection from the harmful effects of exposure to the sun, or in rare conditions a chemical attack. If this is only in a small localized patch, then no treatment is necessary but should be regularly rechecked. However, if it's more widespread, the areas will have to be re-roofed and specialist protection introduced. Another common defect we could reference is blistering, and blisters can be caused by water vapour pressure occurring below the roof covering, and the blister should be cut and then rebonded to the underlay, allowing any trapped moisture to escape first. The source of the moisture should also be traced and rectified. And these are typical examples of crazing and blistering that we can see in the shown photos. Another question we may be asked is, what other sorts of cracks would you expect to see on a brick building and what may have caused them? And to address this, first of all we could reference subsidence, and this is a movement down in the ground level, and this can occur in clay soil where the growth of large trees which remove water from the ground can cause this, and this can lead to vertical cracking if in the centre of a building, or diagonal cracking if at the corner of a property, and the cracks will be larger at the top and thinner at the bottom. We could also reference a ground heave, and this is a upward movement in the ground level. And in clay soil, the removal of a tree will often increase the moisture content of the soil, and this could cause the soil to swell, or the ground to swell, and this leads to vertical cracking, again if at the centre of the building, or diagonal cracking if at the corner of the property. We could also reference a settlement, which is a downward movement due to an increased load of a building. Typically buildings will settle when first constructed, or if there is a change in the load as a new load settles and increases the bearing capacity on the soil. And these are some diagrams showing the different types of causation of cracks within buildings, including the heave, subsidence and settlement. Another question we may be asked under the building pathology competency is checking our understanding of the term damp, or dampness in buildings. And to address this, we can say that a building is only considered to be damp if the moisture becomes visible through the discoloration and staining of finishes, or causes growth of mould, sulfate attack, frost damage, or even drips and puddles are prevalent in the property. A follow-on question we may be asked in relation to damp is, how could you test for dampness within properties? And to address this, we could say that we would use a protometer, moisture reader, or speedy carbide meter, and this can be used to establish the moisture content of walls and the level of damp that's prevalent within the property. We may also be asked a question on how to identify rising damp, what are the causes, and how would we look to remedy rising damp. And to address this, we could say that rising damp causes high tide marks, peeling and blistering of wall finishes, musty smell. It can also cause rotting timber, And a use of a speedy carbide meter can be used to measure moisture readings within the walls of a property, and the readings with the moisture meter will result in high surface readings, often with slight decline, finishing with a sudden cut-off. The causes of rising damp can include where there is no damp-proof course in place, or there may be damp-proof course bridging caused by pointing, render, soil, or paving, or mortar droppings. And the remedy for rising damp can include remedy to any damp-proof cause issues. This can include removal of any sources of bridging, and also a chemically injected DPC. We may also be asked a question on what type of soil is susceptible to ground heave and what are the potential or possible causes. And to address this, we can say that cohesive soils such as clay are often susceptible to ground heave. Possible causes could include the removal of trees, a change in the water table, leaking drains, or inadequate foundations that are built within the movement zones. That brings us towards the end of this Q&A practice session. I really hope you found that video useful, and please remember to subscribe to receive ongoing APC support.